Live from DPW, my name is Chris Sawchuk, and I'm with the Hackett Group. Today, I'm joined by Robin Shahani, but before we get into talking to Robin about some perspectives, what I want to share with you is we're here at DPW, and it is just chock full of technology, people talking about AI and the solution providers in that space. But what we want to explore today, and what I'd like to explore with Robin, is specifically in terms of moving forward. In some of the research that we've done more recently, one of the things that we saw several years ago was the elevation and the need to transform procurement. And it was always interesting to me in terms of why are we talking about that? And then last year, there was the elevation of AI. And it occurred very clearly that this transformation that's needed, and I do believe that a lot of procurement leaders understand this is a broad-based transformation, that the AI was driving it. We have to start to reimagine, rethink, not just transform the procurement organization. And that's the conversation that I want to have with Robin to get his perspectives on this today. So Robin, you and I have known each other for a number of years, going back to, I would say, in several CPO roles. Yep. Why don't you share a little bit about your background and how you got here today, and maybe a little bit of perspectives of what you're doing now?
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. As you said, I'm a procurement and transformation expert, focused now on kind of rewiring for AI. I think that's a term that you and I like to use together, reimagine and rewire, because I think it goes well beyond.
Recode, right?
Or recode. Very different than what folks have thought of in the past. Transformations were set up, and then you went on a multi-year journey and you stabilized, and that was that. This is a fundamental rethink of the operating model from my perspective. And quite frankly, I think in addition to the great work that's happening with AI, LLMs, and applied AI, and all the tools we're seeing here at the conference, I think it's important to talk about some of the basics, the core skills to actually have a successful, rewiring of the function. And so that's what I've been focused on. My CPO roles have been largely in fintech and financial services, but I've done a lot of transformation work across industries and across the enterprise that go beyond procurement. And I see these similarities happening in other functions as well.
Yeah. It's interesting. You and I have known each other and, have worked together for a number of years and through a number of different transformations. And, today, as I mentioned, there is a focus on transformation, or as you're calling it, a recoding, a rewiring, a reimagining of the whole supply management procurement function. And really what's driving that is the opportunity that AI is providing to us. It's a way to sort of step back and say, now I have this new technology, what can I do with it? So I want to start with, and you made a comment, there are a lot of solution providers here at DPW. There's some perspectives is, how do I get started? Do I just go out there and I'm a CPO, I want to get out, I want to start to rewire my organization, I want to recode my organization?
It's tempting.
How should I get started?
It's tempting, right?
There's what, maybe 100 different providers out there.
And there's some amazing stuff.
Absolutely.
Really incredible. I'm amazed every year, every 6 months as these conferences progress, how amazing this stuff is. It's very difficult to stay on top of it all, honestly.
Yeah.
But it's great to talk to some of the, some of the tool providers, some of the LLM providers on what they're doing, and so on, what their best clients are doing.
Yeah.
So, I would say, to me, tool selection, technology selection is always a part of the answer. It's a really important part of the answer. I personally really believe in kind of thinking about how the entire system, kind of a systems thinking approach, the entire system, the entire organization needs to rethink its operating model to take advantage and unlock the full value of these AI tools, which are really fantastic, right? So when I think about kind of a disciplined approach to this, I think about, again, that end-to-end view, but specifically people, process, systems, data, and culture. Okay. And I talk about those things. I like to separate people and culture and data and systems because I think they're slightly different things. I think it's important that you have the right environment culturally to make this successful. That is often a tone that's set best by the CEO. And oftentimes what you'll hear from a CEO or from a board is, we've got to take advantage of AI. We've got to move fast. We've got to drive performance quickly. That's the expectation of the street.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that significantly across
functions,
and it really just started occurring, I think, in the really the first quarter. The pressure from the board to the executive committee, which includes the CEO, down to people like yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when you're on the, on the receiving end, if you're a CPO and you're on the receiving end, the easiest thing to do in many cases is go fight for the dollars.
Yeah.
Go figure out what tool you like and start to implement, right? Everyone understands software implementation.
Yeah.
And you could even frame it as part of a broader transformation.
Right.
And it's a journey. It's going to take this amount of time. Here are the milestones along the way. We can budget for it. We can plan for it. It's nice and tidy.
Yeah.
But really what needs to happen going forward, I think, is that you have to build this living, breathing ecosystem. As I said, the tech is moving so quickly. Anything you pick today is going to be outdated in a few months, right?
Yeah.
And so it needs to be agile. It needs to be dynamic.
Yeah.
And you also can't possibly take multiple years to get there.
Right.
So what do? I think it's really important to start thinking about, what condition is my data in? Start the process there. And we can come back and talk about that some more. But to me, that's critical as a first step. Then you've got to start thinking about processes and the ecosystem and how humans are going to interact with the tools.
Yeah.
What problems you're trying to solve. I think too often the priority comes from the CFO office, which is, I want you to drive something that's going to make your organization more efficient. And really, we also need to be thinking about effectiveness. For instance, most recently, I was working on a go-to-market project and kind of client experience focused project, transforming that end-to-end process. It was very easy to say, we're going to implement best-in-class tools. We're going to rip out what we have. But really, when it's thousands of people, you need to think about how they're going to interact with it, how your clients are going to interact with it, what their problems are that we're solving.
Yeah.
And great if we have a business case that's based on efficiency, but it should also be based on growth, performance, retention of clients, all that sort of stuff. And so things that drive loyalty to your brand, very, very important. Similarly, I think when you're dealing with suppliers and end users within the company as a CPO, really important to understand what problem you're solving.
Yeah. Let me ask you, and I want to go back because I want to dive into each of the dimensions that you mentioned. One of the, as you mentioned, culture and people and process and technology and data. I would say governance as well as being one of those.
Yep.
But I want to start back. There's a lot of folks out there, and there are a few organizations that I've seen that have had the opportunity to have a clean sheet. And if we're really truly thinking about a reimagining, a recoding of the organization, your thoughts in terms of saying, I know I have all of this today, but if I need to create a vision, is it better to sit down with a clean sheet and draw that up? Or is it better to start with, what are your thoughts on that?
Look, I think it's, we're here in New York.
Yeah.
I think of what it would take to make the public transportation system better every day, right?
Yeah.
So how do you get a subway line that works? How do you create a new subway line through Manhattan that's going to work more efficiently without disrupting everything that's going on every day, right? So that to me is kind of the key. You can't possibly stop moving people. You can't stop processing, purchase orders, and so on. So you have to figure out a way to rewire while existing operations are still going.
But does it hold you back from truly being creative, being rooted in terms of where you are today?
So I don't think it's about being rooted. I think it's about bridging. Right. Okay. So I think that's really important. So you've mentioned, and I've been blessed with the opportunity in the past too to say, how do you create from scratch? And that's a great thing.
Yeah.
But I also, when I was doing that, I think personally that run and build activities need to be somewhat segregated. So I was given the opportunity to do the build while others did the run. And I think that was important because I could focus entirely on the art of the possible.
Yeah.
It took a deep understanding of what was running today and what was working and not working, but I could focus on the future. And then I could figure out a way with those run executives to build the bridge to a future. Yeah. When that would happen, what preparation we needed to do so that it wasn't unleashed on our clients or on our people in a way that was untenable. Yeah. But I think that's there are kind of multiple opportunities. One is if you can start with a clean sheet, or you're a startup or something, amazing. That's almost the easiest scenario.
I do believe that. And you know, there are some folks that I know have that luxury, that they came into an organization, CFO says, you know what, hey, 90 days, I need you to come back with a plan. And in one case, this individual, the CPO of a new organization, didn't really have much of a procurement organization, went back with a plan. And, you know, what he went back with was something that was significantly less in terms of headcount, et cetera, than the CFO was expecting.
Yeah.
And his comment is, I'm not designing it based on my old playbook. It's based on a new playbook. But you're right. That is a very unique opportunity for somebody to have a truly clean sheet.
It's I would argue probably too jarring for a large company to go through that, where you're going to be completely separate. You know, you're going to cut over on one day, you know, from, you know, one thing to something totally different. So I do think there needs to be a bridge and an evolution, and you need to have the right change enablement controls and so on. I don't want to sound too bureaucratic, but I think that's the reality of the environment for large corporates.
But I want to ask you, and I know we're talking, but the speed. You know, there's a lot of folks talking about speed today, and you know, there's folks, you know, way outside of procurement, just thought leaders out there that say, you know, the new currency of business is velocity and speed, that everything else becomes commoditized over time. And so as you sit there and say, well, you know what, you know, we have to go through these different ways of getting there. And I agree, it takes time, especially with people. People you can't change, you know, fast. But at the same time, it's sort of like this external pressure as you look at the environment around you, how fast it's going. And so how do you balance those two?
I agree. I mean, I think, again, it's a two-speed approach, right? You've got to do, or maybe even, you know, there's the standard approach that you're going. You need to make sure you keep the lights on. There's a new vision that you want to do. And then there's some quick wins along the way that you can get to show progress and actually make meaningful impact quickly. But there's some changes just take longer, unfortunately, right? People are people. I would argue
which one is it people you think is the one that is the hardest?
I mean, people are always the hardest, right? Humans are you know, we can get machines to do some pretty amazing things these days, as we know. So people are always the hardest. And I think it's this kind of, you know, you've got to be a seasoned transformation executive and a seasoned procurement executive to pull this off well, because otherwise it's very tempting to say, I'm going to build this and they will come. I'm buying the best tool there is. I've hired the best systems integrator or consultant there is. No problem. The reality is you need to come up with a pretty bold vision. You need to move quickly, no doubt. But you also have to think about what can the organization tolerate. And, you know, again, I know the velocity is increasing, so it's not about where the organization used to be, but where's it going to be in 3 months? Where's it going to be in 6 months? Can I, you know, match that pace and push it perhaps a little bit? But you don't want to get to a place where you've done something that no one understands, no one can actually do.
I want to ask you, and I want to get into the different dimensions, and I want to talk about those, but I do want to talk to you about vision. You mentioned having that bold vision. You know, one of the things I find more difficult for a lot of leaders today is having a vision. You know, if I went back and, you know, I have an opportunity to talk to a lot of different leaders that are out there. And, you know, if I was sitting here in 2015 and I would ask a leader, I said, you know, let's put a vision together, you know, out to 2018, they would put that vision out there. And then, you know, what they do is they, you know, step back and say, all right, now let's look at all the different dimensions, technology, people, et cetera, and how are we going to go and achieve that vision in the next 3 years? They put a roadmap together. What I'm finding today, it's more difficult, and I want your perspective on this, to create that vision. And I'll give you what I believe is challenging. 2 years ago, if we were at DPW, we weren't talking about agents. Okay. Today, it's all the conversation. You got assistive AI, and now we have autonomous, semi-autonomous AI. And how do we blend that in? You know, as we look out and people will talk about 3-5 year visions, I don't know what's going to change. It's sort of like the realm of I don't know what I don't know. How do you vision in an environment where you don't know what's changing? Because any vision that was 2 years ago, you know, before we really ingested what agents are, is fundamentally, you know, we took it off and say, all right, we got to reimagine the term, recode the environment, because something happened that's going to change the way that I used to think what that goalpost was in the future.
Sure. I think that's why you need to be so agile, and your time frames need to be a lot shorter, right? So there's, again, the bias to action helps.
Yeah.
I think these are two different things. One is being a visionary today involves just being iterative, right?
Yeah.
And continually staying a step ahead of others to remain competitive. There's no question about that. You need to know your space well, and you need to know what's happening out there. And that's one of the reasons why, you and I spend time at conferences like this.
Yeah.
You don't do it every day, but it's really important to stay in touch with the pulse of what other people are seeing and doing, and also what tool sets are out there and how they're being applied. Right.
Yeah.
Really important. So I think that's really important. But I do think that, coming back to the central thesis to me, the rewiring. My view is you have to do all that, and you have to move faster through some of the traditional capabilities to actually get ready for the entire thing. What can't be, the case is you can't be incremental, right? So I think you have to do step change.
And this is where you
innovation.
said be bold.
Yeah, you have to. You have to be bold, and you have to move quickly. But that's not to say that you can just say, I'm going to set a roadmap for 3 years and I'm going to put it on a shelf or paste it on a wall.
You can't do that.
Again, you have to revisit it every week, right? It's like, wow, I learned this. What am I going to do with that piece of information? And is it a tweak, or is it a fundamental rethink, right? Now, I do think that there's a certain amount of sponsorship from the top down, and kind of change fatigue and other stuff that you've got to cut through, because if you show up at your boss's office every week and say, I have a new roadmap, they're probably going to throw you out of the building, right? So it's really important that you have some level of consistency, but again, bridges, really important as you go.
Yeah. And, what I want to go back to is, how do we do that?
Yeah.
Right. So we talked about visioning. You talked about, we have to be agile in this world today, which is a little bit different. Fixed visions, fixed roadmaps may not be necessarily as viable today as it was. But let's talk about the components. This goes back to what we were talking about before. You made the comment that it's not just a technology. I can't just buy a solution, I'll be successful. And, as I sit here at DPW, I'm hearing more of the leaders of procurement like yourself talking about that, understanding this is a very broad-based reimagining, rethinking, recoding of procurement. But I want to dive into each one of those elements. This is where I think, you can provide some insight to a lot of folks in terms of, what do we have to do? How do we have to rethink these areas? And I'd like to start with people. We said that might be, create some of the more of the friction in terms of the speed that we want to move forward with that. So as you think about people, what are some key things that have to change there? And maybe a little bit about the role of these individuals. What skills do they need?
So and I think there's the role, but there's also their kind of appetite for change, right? And a dynamic kind of environment. So if you've been in the function a long time and you like the way you've done things a long time and you have your own ways of doing them, it becomes somewhat problematic in this new world to kind of, that you value the expertise, but the kind of ability to adapt is also very, very critical. And as we all have heard, being a lifelong learner is where it's at, right, these days. So I think all of us, all of us that are mid-career certainly have to either, move quicker, think faster, learn a lot more about how to disrupt ourselves and get comfortable with that. But so first to me is the type of talent, the kind of profile of the talent from a personality and comfort perspective with all of that change, right? Because there's a tremendous burden of change. People that want to kind of set it on cruise control and coast, this is not for them.
That's
right.
Not for them.
I don't know of an environment that is like that these days.
Well,
right?
What is for the people like that? I mean, is there? I mean, because there are people like that.
I don't know. I think those are the people that are probably protesting AI right now. Right. So I'm not sure. I don't have an answer for that, candidly. I think that. The way that I've decided to solve the problem is I've embraced it, right? I've always wanted to embrace change, but now I'm just kind of embracing new change in new ways.
You give it a choice.
Moving. I don't have a choice, but it's something that I've always been passionate about, right? It's maybe my consulting roots. But I think that it's important to kind of figure out a better mousetrap at all times and take advantage of what's out there. The other thing, by the way, in a CPO seat in particular, you need to bring the audience along too. So one aspect of people is your leadership, right? And others that are actually funding a lot of this or supporting you as you go down this journey or helping you fundamentally shift the organization's thinking. You can't do that alone from the CPO chair.
Yeah.
So when I think of all the people aspects, the people and culture aspects, there are a lot of changes that need to happen to support all of this. So it's the right type of person. And then there's the capability, right? So I think it's really important that we bring the capability, but honestly, your knowledge of pulp and paper kind of is less relevant in a world of AI where I can get a lot of that information in real time. And so what I need is somebody that can help the machines execute and think about how to do it better. And in some cases, to the example that you provided earlier, you should be able to do it with many fewer human resources and a number of digital agents. So we've seen kind of autonomous agents doing negotiation, which people talked about a couple of years ago, but no one actually saw in action. But the combination of kind of that tech coupled with the ability to do voice and other things is very, very powerful. And so I think that piece, I think contracts, there are a number of areas where it'll impact it. And if you're a person in those spaces, you've got to rethink how you're going to work it.
Let me ask you a more specific question. So CPO, you're designing, you're assembling this team of what you believe you need for the next 2 to 3 years. What skills are you going to be looking for that are critical for that individual?
I mean, so again, I think there's the core profile, core skills about kind of comfort with the technology, an eagerness to learn and kind of develop, an eagerness to drive change across the enterprise, and understanding that supplier partnerships are critical. So there's the tool provider and partnering with them to get the most out of it. But there's also all of your supply base and understanding what their capabilities are that you can take advantage and the innovation you're going to bring into the organization. So again, I think a very market-focused, dynamic view of the function is what we're going to need to see from our talent going forward.
Okay. I'm going to ask you another question. As a CPO, are there critical skills that are necessary and competencies for the leader that we're sitting here 3 years from now in this fundamentally different environment? How does the role of the CPO change?
Yeah, so I think, again, it has to be transformation focused, right? The old days of purchasing, the purchasing manager, that's largely gone by the wayside for most large corporates, certainly. But, and certainly what you see at the tech firms these days, it's a very different world. But I do think that, so you need people that kind of appreciate that market dynamics, that are constantly looking outwards to understand how to do things. It's not about processing contracts. That's not a part of the job anymore, right? And arguably negotiation is going that way as well, right? So there are tools that are going to enable that. So it ends up being about understanding what your company is going to need, not just today, but in the foreseeable future, and building the flexible frameworks to go out and get that in the marketplace. I still think that selection and discovery and some of that judgment is going to be harder to replace. So I do look for kind of experience and expertise, of people that understand those dynamics and the ability to bring the organization along. Again, I don't think it's about taking orders. I don't think it's about processing POs. I think it's those skills tend to go away.
Yeah, I think, to your point, I do believe those areas you mentioned, I call them one of the operational aspects of procurement. We're going to see an accelerated elimination of human capability involved in that type of activity looking forward.
I think a comfort with data and metrics-based management is also critical, right? So I haven't highlighted that before, but I think it's really important that we have, measurable performance and a comfort with looking at the data in interesting ways and analyzing that data to evaluate how you're doing and what your needs actually are.
So let me ask you, so we're looking out and I want to talk about a couple other dimensions. We talked about talent and human capital, even leadership a bit. You just mentioned data. Understanding that the function that we create in many ways will be more of an intelligent capability going forward. And so how do I get access? How do I maintain? How do I create that intelligence capability in my organization?
So I think it ends up being this, interdependent kind of set of problems that you're trying to solve, because data is still a garbage in, garbage out problem, right? If you haven't normalized your data is not clean, even the best unstructured data analytics are not going to get you to where you need to be and get you the insight. So that's why I said you need to double down on having the right people, the right type of person in your organization, and make the right cultural shifts to kind of get there. You need to have people that are data savvy, and you need to take advantage of those skills to actually go in and understand where your data is, who owns the data, who are consumers of the data, and what quality, of data is out there. How do you remedy gaps in your data and make sure it's ready for the best, systems tools? I think having the right process and having a disciplined process really helps ensure that you have good data coming out of it. And so people overlook that, but I do think that it's really important to get the process piece right. It's also important as you try to automate processes to have standardized and industrialized processes.
I want to ask you on the data. You mentioned, getting all these things correct. You mentioned a number of different characteristics of the data, but I want to ask you about the volume of data. Does the data job ever end? I mean, I can clean it up. I get it all clean. But then am I done?
No, I mean, obviously that, like everything else, is living, breathing. But again, if you put in place the right automations and the right processes, the data is less likely to get corrupted, right? So it's a constant fight to make sure the data is up to date and that you have systems that are correcting the data, right, in real time, that are normalizing in real time. But the one-time effort to kind of clean up the legacy mess is always the challenge, right? That's the part that AI is not great at just yet.
And it's interesting because if I went back to 2018, the whole focus on digital transformation, now we're talking about AI-enabled transformation, and a lot of folks focused on technology, but they didn't necessarily, they were aware that data was important, but it was all about the tools, the toys
so
that we were
digital was
putting
about
in.
Tools and it wasn't about data.
And I think what AI has done, and your perspective on this, is that it really, created the awareness about the importance of the fundamentals, because AI has to work off of data. And so now we're doing that, and also understanding, I think that's what you're saying, is that the data job never ends. It continues to grow, and if we're going to get new insights, the only way we can do is continue to refresh and gain new insights. So is part of the role is to find new sources of data to enable the advantage that we have as an organization.
I mean, I think about negotiations as the example that I was using is, it's really important to have the right data sources around how to benchmark what you're doing, right? So to me, it's not about negotiation. It ends up being about driving to a benchmark. Right. The ability to kind of go back and forth with the supplier, not that impressive. The ability to know that you got the right value, the right deal for you is what's really important. So benchmarks with texture on benchmarks, as in the business that you're in, the data is part of the story. Interpreting the data and applying it is very different. So that to me is a very important part of this whole secret sauce.
Let me pivot to another area. And, we touched on some of these different dimensions that we talked about, but I want to pivot to just looking into the future a little bit. We're sitting here, and let's just say Matthias has us have the opportunity to have a conversation 3 years from now, sitting here in New York in the podcast booth. What are we talking about when it comes to supply management, procurement, all of these different dimensions? What are we talking about? Right now, we're talking about the reimagining of that capability. We're talking about the need to look at all of this. 3 years, 5 years from now, what are we talking about?
So I think we're going to have tested the capabilities, right? This is moving very quickly now. My guess is at some point that tends to slow down a little bit. The progress slows down as it naturally would. And I think we have kind of further optimized what the tools can do, what humans can do. We're going to get a lot better at that human-machine interaction.
That blending.
And kind of taking advantage of the machine where it makes the most sense and what things are really best left to humans. I'll tell you what I don't think we're going to be doing. I don't think we're going to be sipping pina coladas and leaving everything to the machines, right? So I do think that kind of there's going to be a long tail
Yeah.
to organizations being able to move and rewire.
Yeah.
This is a journey that's just starting. 3 years from now, I'd say, maybe the Fortune 100 has gone through it. But there are going to be thousands and thousands of other companies to think about. I also think that, we forget oftentimes in the jobs that you and I have that the heartbeat of countries like the United States is largely in the mid-market.
Yeah.
Right. There are a massive number of people that work for companies in the mid-market. They don't have the resources or, the ability to take advantage of this stuff in the same way that large corporates do, or fancy tech startups that are well-funded do.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be important to kind of bring those guys along as well. And it's going to be
hopefully fast enough, because I do believe, and I think you believe this, is that, if they're not able to come along fast enough,
they're not going to be competitive.
They're not going to be competitive,
Right.
and they'll be gone.
Right.
Which creates an interesting dynamic, when you think about those companies with resources to be able to go through this type of transition. So,
Yeah.
but yeah.
But I think that, the other things we'll be talking about are the systems landscape. Not everyone can win, right? Today, anybody can create a company. Anyone can create some vibe code and application that does amazing things. Certainly, you'll see that some are further advanced than others.
Yeah.
My guess is we're not going to know who the winners are in the space for a little while, right? And there's also the question of the one exception to all of this to me is the ERP.
Yeah.
Right? No one's really messing with the ERP in a major kind of credible way.
Yeah.
Right. And so what are the ERP providers going to do? Are they simply going to vacuum up some of these providers? Are they going to build an answer of their own? I think we're still waiting to see kind of what those guys end up doing.
Well, they have a data moat, which is quite.
They are, and they're trying to monetize it, right?
Absolutely.
And so I understand that approach. I think the question's going to be, that feels like just a defensive posture to me.
Yeah.
Right? It's not really how are we going to go? They don't want to reinvent themselves, and no one wants to go through a 10-year, implementation, right? So what's the answer there? There's got to be somebody who can do this, more effectively.
Yeah.
And so I think we're going to be talking about fewer systems. I think we're going to be talking about different sets of data, to your point. I think they're going to be aggregated data. And hopefully some of these issues about culture are going to be resolved.
Yeah, and I think the point that you mentioned, we're going to learn a lot over the next several years around the blending of human and technology as we start to blend these environments together. And I think that's really, to your point, some of the things that we're going to be talking about 3 to 5 years from now is how we built those environments and how it's working, how we're seeing the two participate effectively within an environment. So, Robin,
I'll see you in 3 to 5 years.
I'll see you in 3 to 5 years, hopefully sooner. But thank you. I know we wanted to touch on this subject, rewiring, the whole procurement organization, thinking about it through the lens of AI, and I'd say we scratched the surface on some of that. Thank you for your insights, and
I think the one thing I'd like to leave us with for next time is making sure that while system selection is a part of the solution, it is definitely not the full answer, right?
No,
you need to think about
broad-based,
all the steps that it's going to take to make that system a higher performance system.
Yeah, and I think, that's been iterated here at DPW, and you certainly have iterated and provided a great perspective on that as well. So thank you, Robin.
Thank you.
All right.